So my home base is Sitella Winery in the Swan Valley. So we mostly have been making sparkling wine since 2001 from Pemberton and the Swan Valley primarily. Swan for Chenin Blanc and Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from Pemberton. But we've also bought sparkling fruit from the Pronger-Ups, Margaret River, as well for trial and error for different reasons for our sparkling wines. And I guess over the years, I guess for me, I had a bit of a weird champagne sparkling obsession when I was 17. Don't know why, I asked mum and dad, but as they like to tell me, I just work there, just do what you're told, which is a separate issue. But the sparkling, I guess, started for me back in 2004 all the way through to now. And then visiting Champagne over the last 15 years about 7 or 8 times, going back and forth and understanding, also working there, understanding their processes and stylistically how to make things the way they do, and then I guess this being a West Australian symposium, trying to relate that back to home, which is obviously here. So I guess what I've tried to collate, what we did with regards to climates and styles from all around the world, had several consultants, wine consultants, over the last 20 years. One in particular was Tony Jordan, which we were lucky enough to have him for at least 6 years. So obviously he brought his advice and wisdom from obviously working on setting up Yarra Chandon and working in Hunters, Aquarelle, New Zealand, then Chandon Brazil, Chandon China, then obviously teaching a lot of the Moet Hennessy champagne winemakers that used to come down from France and work in the Yarra, and obviously being a chemist and a good professor and educator, he was pretty good at that. So what we did here then, with gathering information, which I'll show you at the end, which is quite interesting, is look at, okay, what clones of Chardonnay and Pinot are being used predominantly and primarily in Champagne, being a benchmark obviously, but also not just there, you know, California, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and understanding how they age. So I'll just sort of touch on the styles, which has already been touched on, clones of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which we looked at for certain reasons. And there's obviously the tirage and lees time, which I think we've touched on a bit anyway. Sparkling winemaking. So obviously being in the Southern Forests, the reason why we stayed with this region, other than for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, other than going further south, say Denmark or Pronger-Ups or Mount Barker or Margaret River for that matter, is because one of the primary, I guess, considerations to take into account that's very important for bubble making is, one, not that you can't do it near the coast, but two, being away from the coast, away from high rainfall, but also having access to the right clones of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I think we've touched on some of the clones, but the ones here predominantly that we use that are very successful are for Pinot Noir, Droopy, Upright, 777, 115, 114. Then with Chardonnay, we touched on it this morning, I think Nick did, was staying away from Mendoza, or Gin clones we call it here, because of its tropical tin pineapple characters, but the I-10 V1, 95, 96, very integral to the Chardonnay backbone of sparkling winemaking, because not to say they're neutral, but because they have lower phenolics and they don't have that Tropicana character, which in sparkling wine is a bit of an antichrist. Well, it is. And then Pinot, structurally, the other 4 clones that we've nailed it down to of Pinot Noir would be pretty important for, one, palate shape, but two, the secondary age characters you get. So what we looked at with Tony for a while was, okay, we set up a reserve wine program at Sitella, and that started in 2011, and then we continued it on after that, and then looked at how the reserves did age, partially some of them in tank, most of them in old ex-white casks, barriques, and what we were after, okay, out of these clones, Chardonnay and Pinot, which are going to go the right way in character. And we were after the toasty, nutty, secondary characters, even the honeyed characters, but also down to the clones. So that was a pretty laborious process, which it took probably about 7-8 years. And I guess what we know, a lot of winemakers in here probably have made a lot of white wine elsewhere, but with machine picking versus whole bunch pressing, that's also another determining factor in terms of getting those characters if you want them, but also the tearing of the skins versus whole bunch pressing is a completely different bottle age character that happens usually between that 5 and 7 year mark. So that's sort of an observational process, but we've done it for a long time in the Swan, you know, from the Hortons Classic Whites, which white wines machine picked straight into the winery, and then after 5 to 7 years they would go that tertiary, secondary character, and even after 7 to 10 years they would do that. We do that for a living up there anyway, so that's a white wine assumption. But obviously a whole bunch of pressing, especially with Pinot Noir, you don't want to be machine picking because obviously you don't want the colour, you want mostly the juice. To touch on the southern forests, obviously there's issues in every region regarding grapevine trunk disease. Obviously vectors like people would know mealybug for leaf roll virus, which can quite inhibit the ripening process of especially Pinot Noir. So you get uneven ripeness through basically your entire fruit zone, because obviously with bubbles you want to try and pick everything around the same Beaumay and PHTA obviously that's why Mendoza is obviously another thing we don't, in terms of the variability with hen and chicken. And then the soil types, southern forest, I sort of isolate them into two major ones, which is the Carry Loams and you've got your laterite gravels. Both offer two different things, work with both of them, both very good. Pinot Noir, probably gravels are very good in terms of concentration and flavour, but the Chardonnays obviously do either, but the Carry Loam's obviously a very fertile place in terms of planting anything, but as long as the canopy management's right. But obviously the laterite gravels, they drain quicker, but it depends on the year stylistically and the climatic conditions of that year. Then climate comparisons, I've just done a brief. The thing we were mostly interested in wasn't such the annual rainfall of this region or the other regions in the state, was comparing them to, I guess, the major sparkling producing regions from Australia. So that being, in our minds, Adelaide Hills being one, the Yarra Valley, the upper and the lower Yarra Valley, Tasmania, the benchmark, which is still in my mind is Champagne, and then Pemmican. So the main thing that we looked at is the summer growing conditions. So your average temperature and your average rainfall during the growing season. Temperature being one to, I guess, maintain some sort of acidity, but also pH is more important than sort of the TAs. And then also the seasonal rainfall during the growing season. So you basically more so for disease, powdery, but the big one, botrytis. Obviously, botrytis affecting white wine in general if you get it, and then obviously the lacase, the enzyme from the botrytis is a major consideration, especially if you're making traditional method sparkling wine and you're aging in a bottle, tends to fall over, goes brown, and sort of you're behind the 8 ball. So then you have to then therefore think, okay, well then do I release it early or release it late? If it's going the right way, if you can manage the botrytis. So as you can see, Victoria, I've just summed it up into the Yarra Valley, average of 20.4 degrees Celsius mean temperature during the growing season, during the summer, and then 559 mils of rainfall compared to Tasmania, 15.6. Yes, this is Tasmania in general. This is obviously not divided up into all the other sub-regions from north to south, so it's a generalisation, I know. And then growing season rainfall, 477 mils. Adelaide Hills, 20.4, so it's fairly similar to Victoria or to the Yarra. And then growing season, rainfall, 268 millimetres per year. I'm assuming that's partially to do with the fact it's further inland, a bit like Pemberton, away from the coast again. And then Pemberton, 20.3 Celsius degrees mean temperature, and rainfall season, rainfall 276 mils. So, and in terms of considering to make great sparkling wine, from this region it can be done, other than the others I know have been spoken about more often and had longer times and periods to gather their pedigree and more investors, but the more sparkling wines made from this region the better, which is happening at the moment. And then Champagne. Mean annual temperature for the year, 10 degrees Celsius. Mean July temperature is 18 degrees Celsius. The average annual rainfall here is 630 mils. It's a fairway inland, but don't let them tell you it's a cool climate during summer because it's friggin' hot. Because usually you have 6 days of heat and then 1 day of rain. It gets up to 35 degrees pretty regularly during the June, July, August period. So whether or not people are now contesting the fact it's actually not cool climate anymore, it's definitely not cool. Sorry, I'm missing slides here. So this is some of the, I've got 3 interesting slides here. I can't see anything. Glasses, good idea. So I've got 3 slides. The first 2 of which are data analysis of wine from the Sparkling Champagne Summit at Shandong for 2 different years. And then the third one is one I got when I did the Sparkling Champagne tasting at the AWRI back in 2012. So it's just out of consideration, it's from all around the world. So you got Napa, then Champagne, which is the Agripark Feast, Shandong Vintage, which is the Yarra, Piri, Tassie, Billy-Cassamon, Champagne, Arras, Tassie, Veuve Clicquot, Champagne, Yellow Glen, God knows where it's from, Piccadilly, obviously, Bollinger, Charles Heidsick, Lamania Bernier, so Champagne, England, Chapel Down, Taittinger, Champagne, Clovehill, Tassie, Shandong, Blanc de Blanc, Stramsberg's the Napa, Andre Clouet, Champagne, and there's the Franciacorta, so from northern Italy, Chandon, and Paul Barrow, Champagne. So I guess the interesting facts for me, I mean, obviously I wouldn't know the climatic conditions of each vintage, but the thing to note is that I know we spoke about acid this morning, and I guess it's, the misconception is pH is more important, more integral for the ageing of a sparkling wine than acid. Acid is I guess, most of these wines have been deacidified with using malolactic fermentation. You can see that from the malic acid analysis as well. Some are partial and some have almost gone through. From what I know from this state, especially this region, the TAs generally, if you're picking at 10.5 Beaumet in a warm year, you'll end up with, on average, definitely 4 grams per litre malic consistently in your Chardonnay and your Pinots, subject to clone and site. But in a cool year, such as like a 2017, 2019, 2021, you'll definitely end up with 5 grams or more. If you're in England, well, you're making sparkling Verges, so who cares? But their TAs are extremely high. They struggle to even finish Malo. But that's a different case. So, and then malolactic, very important, but if you can, the difference is the pHs from the regions around the world. So that's probably key in terms of the aging process. If you want to slow aging down, that's more important. But then you want your TAs to be on average 6.5 to 7 for balance and poise and finesse on the palate. Now with Champagne, it's not uncommon now to see TAs of 5.0. If you go to Charles Heidsieck, which is Piper Heidsieck, their TAs for their free runs in hot years are 5 grams a litre. Full Malo, but they're not as high as they once were. So this century has changed dramatically for them. Their sparkling wines look New World now compared to the last century. And I guess the other factor is the great years of Champagne they always talk about, 43, or 53, 47, 85, 88, 1990, 2003, 2008, 2012, they're all warm, they're all hot years. And they all have lower natural acidity or lower TAs. So the acid thing it's not about acid, it's actually about getting your TA down below 7. But then the compensation thing is, I mean, as you can see, Lemania Bernier there, what have they done? They've got 2.97 pH, but they've gone full Malo. So that might have been a fluke year, 2009. Probably one of the cool years of that decade from 2000 to 2010. But if you were to analyse 2013 from Champagne, that's back to the old days of last century where they used to pick in October, but now obviously harvesting times have shifted, as with all of us, with anything we pick now, but 4 to 6 weeks ahead what they used to be last century. So that, for me, I guess concludes, the point I wanted to make, but and obviously, I guess the other speakers will say the same thing, is that with your CO2 is acidic in water or liquid, so that's your carbonic acid, so you can increase your perceived acid without actually having to add acid, but you don't really want to add acid to bubbles. It's about, more the poison, the finesse of having a lower TA, lower than 7. So, that's about it.